Thomas Mann, Tristan, Einfried, the sanatorium. A long, white, rectilinear building with a side wing set in a spacious garden pleasingly equipped with grottos, bowers, and little bark pavilions. Behind its slate roofs, the mountains tower heavenwards, evergreen, massy, cleft with wooded ravines. Now as then, Dr. Leander directs the establishment. He wears a two-pronged black beard as curly and wiry as horsehair stuffing. His spectacle lenses are thick and glitter. He has the look of a man whom science has cooled and hardened and filled with silent, forbearing pessimism. And with this beard, these lenses, this look, and in his short, reserved, preoccupied way, he holds his patients in his spell, holds those sufferers who, too weak to be laws unto themselves, put themselves into his hands that his severity may be a shield unto them. As for Fräulein von Osterlo, hers it is to preside with unwearying zeal over the housekeeping. Ah, what activity! How she plies, now here, now there, now upstairs, now down, from one end of the building to the other. She is queen in kitchen and storerooms. She mounts the shelves of the linen presses. She marshals the domestic staff. She ordains the bill of fare, to the end that the table shall be economical, hygienic, attractive, appetizing, and all these in the highest degree. She keeps house diligently, furiously, and her exceeding capacity conceals a constant reproach to the world of men, to no one of whom has it yet occurred to lead her to the altar. But ever on her cheeks there glows, in two round carmine spots, the unquenchable hope of one day becoming Frau Dr. Leander. Ozone and stirless air. Einfried, whatever Dr. Leander's rivals and detractors may choose to say about it, can be most warmly recommended for lung patients. And not only these, but patients of all sorts, gentlemen, ladies, even children, come to stop here. Dr. Leander's skill is challenged in many different fields. Sufferers from gastric disorders come, like Frau Magistrate Spots. She has ear trouble into the bargain people, with defective hearts, paralytics, rheumatics, nervous sufferers of all kinds and degrees. A diabetic general here consumes his daily bread amid continual grumblings. There are several gentlemen with gaunt, fleshless faces who fling their legs about in that uncontrollable way that bodes no good. There is an elderly lady, a Frau Pastor Hallenrauch, who has brought 14 children into the world and is now incapable of a single thought, yet has not thereby attained to any peace of mind, but must go roving spectre-like all day long up and down through the house, on the arm of her private attendant, as she has been doing this year past. Sometimes a death takes place among the severe cases, those who lie in their chambers never appearing at meals or in the reception rooms. When this happens, no one knows of it, not even the person sleeping next door. In the silence of the night, the waxen guest is put away, and life at Einfried goes tranquilly on, with its massage, its electric treatment, douches, baths, with its exercises, its steaming and inhaling, in rooms especially equipped with all the triumphs of modern therapeutic. Yes, a deal happens hereabouts. The institution is in a flourishing way. When new guests arrive, at the entrance to the side wing the porter sounds the great gong. When these are departures, Dr. Leander, together with Fräulein von Osterlo, conducts the traveler in due form to the waiting carriage. All sorts and kinds of people have received hospitality at Einfried. Even an author is here stealing time from God Almighty, a queer sort of man, with a name like some kind of mineral or precious stone. Lastly, there is, besides Dr. Leander, another physician who takes care of the slight cases and the hopeless ones. But he bears the name of Muffler and is not worth mentioning. At the beginning of January, a businessman named Kloterjanov, the firm of A.C. Kloterjan and Company, brought his wife to Einfried. The porter rang the gong, and Fräulein von Osterlo received the guests from a distance in the drawing room on the ground floor, which, like nearly all the fine old mansion, was furnished in wonderfully pure Empire style. Dr. Leander appeared straightway. He made his best bow, and a preliminary conversation ensued for the better information of both sides. Beyond the windows lay the wintry garden, the flower beds covered with straw, the grottos snowed under, the little temples forlorn. Two porters were dragging in the guests, trunks from the carriage drawn up before the wrought iron gate, for there was no drive up to the house. "Be careful, Gabrielle. Doucement, my angel, keep your mouth closed," Herr Klutterjohn had said as he led his wife through the garden, and nobody could look at her without tender-heartedly echoing the caution, though, to be sure, Herr Klutterjohn might quite as well have uttered it all in his own language. The coachman who had driven the pair from the station to the sanatorium was an uncouth man and insensitive, yet he sat with his tongue between his teeth as the husband lifted down his wife. The very horses, steaming in the frosty air, seemed to follow the procedure with their eyeballs rolled back in their heads out of sheer concern for so much tenderness and fragile charm. The young wife's trouble was her trachea. It was expressly so set down in the letter Herr Klotterjohn had sent from the shores of the Baltic to announce their impending arrival to the director of Einfried. The trachea, and not the lungs, thank God. But it is a question whether, if it had been the lungs, the new patient could have looked any more pure and ethereal, any remoter from the concerns of this world than she did now as she leaned back pale and weary in her chaste white enameled armchair beside her robust husband and listened to the conversation. Her beautiful white hands, bare save for the simple wedding ring, rested in her lap among the folds of a dark, heavy cloth skirt. She wore a close-fitting waist of silver gray with a stiff collar. It had an all-over pattern of arabesques in high-pile velvet. But these warm, heavy materials only served to bring out the unspeakable delicacy, sweetness, and languor of the little head, to make it look more than ever touching, exquisite, and unearthly. Her light brown hair was drawn smoothly back and gathered in a knot low in her neck, but near the right temple a single lock fell loose and curling, not far from the place where an odd little vein branched across one well-marked eyebrow, pale blue and sickly amid all that pure, well-nigh transparent spotlessness. That little blue vein above the eye dominated quite painfully the whole fine oval of the face. When she spoke, it stood out still more, yes, even when she smiled, and lent her expression a touch of strain, if not actually of distress, that stirred vague fear in the beholder. And yet she spoke, and she smiled, spoke frankly and pleasantly in her rather husky voice, with a smile in her eyes, though they again were sometimes a little difficult and showed a tendency to avoid direct gaze. And the corners of her eyes, both sides the base of the slender little nose, were deeply shadowed. She smiled with her mouth too, her beautiful wide mouth, whose lips were so pale and yet seemed to flash, perhaps because their contours were so exceedingly pure and well cut. Sometimes she cleared her throat, then carried her handkerchief to her mouth and afterwards looked at it. "Don't clear your throat like that, Gabrielle," said Herr Klotterjohn. "You know, darling, Dr. Hinspeter expressly forbade it, and what we have to do is to exercise self-control, my angel." "As I said, it is the trachea," he repeated. "Honestly, when it began, I thought it was the lungs, and it gave me a scare, I do assure you." "But it isn't the lungs. We don't mean to let ourselves in for that, do we, Gabrielle, my love, eh? Ha ha! Surely not," said Dr. Leander, and glittered at her with his eyeglasses. Whereupon Herr Klotterjohn ordered coffee and rolls, and the speaking way he had of sounding the C far back in his throat and exploding the B in butter must have made any soul alive hungry to hear it. His order was filled, and rooms were assigned to him and his wife, and they took possession with their things. And Dr. Leander took over the case himself, without calling in Dr. Muller. The population of Einfried took unusual interest in the fair new patient. Herr Klotterjohn, used as he was to see homage paid her, received it all with great satisfaction. The diabetic general, when he first saw her, stopped grumbling a minute. The gentlemen with the fleshless faces smiled and did their best to keep their legs in order. As for Frau Magistrate Spatz, she made her oldest friend on the spot. Yes, she made an impression, this woman who bore Herr Klotterjohn's name. A writer who had been sojourning a few weeks in Einfried, a queer sort. He was, with a name like some precious stone or other, positively colored up when she passed him in the corridor, stopped stock-still, and stood there as though rooted to the ground, long after she had disappeared. Before 2 days were out, the whole little population knew her history. She came originally from Bremen, as one could tell by certain pleasant small twists in her pronunciation, and it had been in Bremen that, 2 years gone by, she had bestowed her hand upon Herr Cloterjohn, a successful businessman, and become his life partner. She had followed him to his native town on the Baltic coast, where she had presented him, some 10 months before the time of which we write, and under circumstances of the greatest difficulty and danger, with a child, a particularly well-formed and vigorous son and heir. But since that terrible hour she had never fully recovered her strength, granting, that is, that she had ever had any. She had not been long up, still extremely weak, with extremely impoverished vitality, when one day after coughing she brought up a little blood. Oh, not much, an insignificant quantity in fact, but it would have been much better to be none at all. And the suspicious thing was that the same trifling but disquieting incident recurred after another short while. Well, of course, there were things to be done, and Dr. Hinspeter, the family physician, did them. Complete rest was ordered, little pieces of ice swallowed, morphine administered to check the cough, and other medicines to regulate the heart action. But recovery failed to set in, and while the child, Anton Cloterjohn Jr., a magnificent specimen of a baby, seized on his place in life and held it with prodigious energy and ruthlessness, a low, unobservable fever seemed to waste the young mother daily. It was, as we have heard, an affection of the trachea, a word that in Dr. Hinspeter's mouth sounded so soothing, so consoling, so reassuring that it raised their spirits to a surprising degree. But even though it was not the lungs, the doctor presently found that a milder climate and a stay in a sanatorium were imperative if the cure was to be hastened. The reputation enjoyed by Einfried and its director had done the rest. Such was the state of affairs. Herr Cloterjohn himself related it to all and sundry. He talked with a slovenly pronunciation, in a loud, good-humored voice, like a man whose digestion is in as capital order as his pocketbook, shoveling out the words pell-mell in the broad accents of the northern coast-dweller, hurtling some of them forth so that each sound was a little explosion, at which he laughed as at a successful joke. He was of medium height, broad, stout, and short-legged, his face full and red, with watery blue eyes shaded by very fair lashes, with wide nostrils and humid lips. He wore English side whiskers and English clothes, and it enchanted him to discover at Einfried an entire English family, father, mother, and 3 pretty children with their nurse, who were stopping here for the simple and sufficient reason that they knew not where else to go. With this family, he partook of a good English breakfast every morning. He set great store by good eating and drinking and proved to be a connoisseur both of food and wines, entertaining the other guests with the most exciting accounts of dinners given in his circle of acquaintance back home, with full descriptions of the choicer and rarer dishes. In the telling his eyes would narrow benignly, and his pronunciation take on certain palatal and nasal sounds, accompanied by smacking noises at the back of his throat. That he was not fundamentally averse to earthly joys of another sort was evinced upon an evening when a guest of the cure, an author by calling, saw him in the corridor trifling in not quite permissible fashion with a chambermaid, a humorous little passage at which the author in question made a laughably disgusted face. As for Herr Cloterjohn's wife, it was plain to see that she was devotedly attached to her husband. She followed his words and movements with a smile, not the rather arrogant toleration the ailing sometimes bestow upon the well and sound, but the sympathetic participation of a well-disposed invalid in the manifestations of people who rejoice in the blessing of abounding health. Herr Cloterjohn did not stop long in Einfried. He had brought his wife hither, but when a week had gone by, and he knew she was in good hands and well looked after, he did not linger. Duties equally weighty, his flourishing child, his no less flourishing business, took him away. They compelled him to go, leaving her rejoicing in the best of care. Spinel was the name of that author who had been stopping some weeks in Einfried Detlev. Spinel was his name, and his looks were quite out of the common. Imagine a dark man at the beginning of the 30s, impressively tall, with hair already distinctly gray at the temples, and a round, white, slightly bloated face, without a vestige of beard. Not that it was shaven, that you could have told. It was soft, smooth, boyish, with at most a downy hair here and there. And the effect was singular. His bright, doe-like brown eyes had a gentle expression. The nose was thick and rather too fleshy. Also, Herr Spinell had an upper lip like an ancient Roman's, swelling and full of pores, large, carious teeth, and feet of uncommon size. One of the gentlemen with the rebellious legs, a cynic and ribald wit, had christened him the dissipated baby, but the epithet was malicious and not very apartment. Herr Spinell dressed well, in a long black coat and a waistcoat with colored spots. He was unsocial and sought no man's company. Only once in a while he might be overtaken by an affable, blithe, expansive mood, and this always happened when he was carried away by an aesthetic fit at the sight of beauty, the harmony of two colors, a vase nobly formed, or the range of mountains lighted by the setting sun. "How beautiful," he would say, with his head on one side, his shoulders raised, his hands spread out, his lips and nostrils curled and distended. "My God! Look, how beautiful!" And in such moments of ardor, he was quite capable of flinging his arms blindly round the neck of anybody, high or low, male or female, that happened to be near. On his table, for anybody to see who entered his room, there always lay the book he had written. It was a novel of medium length, with a perfectly bewildering drawing on the jacket, printed on a sort of filter paper. Each letter of the type looked like a Gothic cathedral. Fräulein von Osterloh had read it once, in a spare quarter hour, and found it very cultured, which was her circumlocution for inhumanly boursorn. Its scenes were laid in fashionable salons, in luxurious boudoirs full of choice objets d'art, old furniture, gobelins, rare porcelains, priceless stuffs, and art treasures of all sorts and kinds. On the description of these things was expended the most loving care. As you read, you constantly saw Herr Spinell, with distended nostrils, saying, "How beautiful! My God! Look, how beautiful!" After all, it was strange he had not written more than this one book. He so obviously adored writing. He spent the greater part of the day doing it, in his room, and sent an extraordinary number of letters to the post, 2 or 3 nearly every day, and that made it more striking, even almost funny, that he very seldom received one in return. Herr Spinell sat opposite Herr Cloderjan's wife. At the first meal of which the new guests partook, he came rather late into the dining room, on the ground floor of the side wing, bade good day to the company generally in a soft voice, and betook himself to his own place, whereupon Dr. Leander perfunctorily presented him to the new corners. He bowed, and self-consciously began to eat, using his knife and fork rather affectedly, with the large, finely shaped white hands that came out from his very narrow coat sleeves. After a little he grew more at ease and looked tranquilly first at Herr Cloderjan and then at his wife by turns. And in the course of the meal Herr Cloderjan addressed to him sundry queries touching the general situation and climate of Einfried. His wife, in her charming way, added a word or two, and Herr Spinell gave courteous answers. His voice was mild and really agreeable, but he had a halting way of speaking that almost amounted to an impediment, as though his teeth got in the way of his tongue. After luncheon, when they had gone into the salon, Dr. Leander came up to the new arrivals to wish them mahizit, and Herr Cloderjan's wife took occasion to ask about their vis-a-vis. "What was the gentleman's name?" she asked. "I did not quite catch it." "Spinelli?" "Spinell, not Spinelli, madame." "No, he is not an Italian. He only comes from Lemberg, I believe." "And what was it you said? He is an author, or something of the sort?" asked Herr Cloderjan. He had his hands in the pockets of his very easy-fitting English trousers, cocked his head towards the doctor, and opened his mouth, as some people do, to listen the better. "Yes, I really don't know," answered Dr. Leander. "He writes. I believe he has written a book, some sort of novel. I really don't know what," by which Dr. Leander conveyed that he had no great opinion of the author and declined all responsibility on the score of him. But I find that most interesting, said Herr Cloderjohn's wife. Never before had she met an author face to face. Oh, yes, said Dr. Leander obligingly. I understand he has a certain amount of reputation, which closed the conversation. But a little later, when the new guests had retired and Dr. Leander himself was about to go, Herr Spinell detained him in talk to put a few questions for his own part. What was their name? He asked. I did not understand a syllable, of course. Cloderjohn, answered Dr. Leander, turning away. What's that? Asked Herr Spinell. Cloderjohn is their name, said Dr. Leander, and went his way. He set no great store by the author. Have we got as far on as where Herr Cloderjohn went home? Yes, he was back on the shore of the Baltic once more, with his business and his babe, that ruthless and vigorous little being who had cost his mother great suffering and a slight weakness of the trachea, while she herself, the young wife, remained in Einfried and became the intimate friend of Frau Spatz. Which did not prevent Herr Cloderjohn's wife from being on friendly terms with the rest of the guests, for instance with Herr Spinell, who, to the astonishment of everybody, for he had up to now held communion with not a single soul, displayed from the very first an extraordinary devotion and courtesy, and with whom she enjoyed talking, whenever she had any time left over from the stern service of the cure. He approached her with immense circumspection and reverence, and never spoke save with his voice so carefully subdued that Frau Spatz, with her bad hearing, seldom or never caught anything he said. He tiptoed on his great feet up to the armchair in which Herr Cloderjohn's wife leaned, fragilely smiling, stopped 2 paces off, with his body bent forward and one leg poised behind him, and talked in his halting way, as though he had an impediment in his speech, with ardor, yet prepared to retire at any moment, and vanish at the first sign of fatigue or satiety. But he did not tire her. She begged him to sit down with her and the rattan. She asked him questions and listened with curious smiles, for he had a way of talking sometimes that was so odd and amusing, different from anything she had ever heard before. Why are you in Einfried, really? She asked. What cure are you taking, Herr Spinell? Cure? Oh, I'm having myself electrified a bit. Nothing worth mentioning. I will tell you the real reason why I am here, madame. It is a feeling for style. Ah? Said Herr Cloderjohn's wife, supported her chin on her hand, and turned to him with exaggerated eagerness, as one does to a child who wants to tell a story. Yes, madame. Einfried is perfect empire. It was once a castle, a summer residence, I am told. This side wing is a later addition, but the main building is old and genuine. There are times when I cannot endure empire, and then times when I simply must have it in order to attain any sense of well-being. Obviously, people feel one way among furniture that is soft and comfortable and voluptuous, and quite another among the straight lines of these tables, chairs, and draperies. This brightness and hardness, this cold, austere simplicity and reserved strength, madam, it has upon me the ultimate effect of an inward purification and rebirth. Beyond a doubt, it is morally elevating. Yes, that is remarkable, she said. And when I try, I can understand what you mean. Whereto he responded that it was not worth her taking any sort of trouble, and they laughed together. Frau Spatz laughed too and found it remarkable in her turn, though she did not say she understood it. The reception room was spacious and beautiful. The high, white folding doors that led to the billiard room were wide open, and the gentlemen with the rebellious legs were disporting themselves within, others as well. On the opposite side of the room a glass door gave on the broad veranda and the garden. Near the door stood a piano. At a green-covered folding table the diabetic general was playing whist with some other gentlemen. Ladies sat reading or embroidering. The rooms were heated by an iron stove, but the chimney-piece, in the purest style, had coals pasted over with red paper to simulate a fire, and chairs were drawn up invitingly. You are an early riser, Herr Spinell, said Herr Cloderjohn's wife. 2 or 3 times already I have chanced to see you leaving the house at 7:30 in the morning. An early riser. Ah, with a difference, madame, with a vast difference. The truth is, I rise early because I am such a late sleeper. You really must explain yourself, Herr Spinell. Frau Spatz, too, said she demanded an explanation. Well, if one is an early riser, one does not need to get up so early. Or so it seems to me. The conscience, madame, is a bad business. I and other people like me work hard all our lives to swindle our consciences into feeling pleased and satisfied. We are feckless creatures, and aside from a few good hours, we go around weighted down, sick and sore with the knowledge of our own futility. We hate the useful, we know it is vulgar and unlovely, and we defend this position as a man defends something that is absolutely necessary to his existence. Yet all the while conscience is gnawing at us, to such an extent that we are simply one wound. Added to that, our whole inner life, our view of the world, our way of working, is of a kind. Its effect is frightfully unhealthy, undermining, irritating, and this only aggravates the situation. Well then, there are certain little counter-irritants, without which we would most certainly not hold out. A kind of decorum, a hygienic regimen, for instance, becomes a necessity for some of us. To get up early, to get up ghastly early, take a cold bath, and go out walking in a snowstorm, that may give us a sense of self-satisfaction that lasts as much as an hour. If I were to act out my true character, I should be lying in bed late into the afternoon. My getting up early is all hypocrisy, believe me. Why do you say that, Herr Spinell? On the contrary, I call it self-abnegation. Faustus too called it self-abnegation. Hypocrisy or self-abnegation? Call it what you like, madame. I have such a hideously downright nature. Yes, that's it. Surely you torment yourself far too much. Yes, madame, I torment myself a great deal, the fine weather continued. Rigid and spotless white the region lay, the mountains, house and garden, in a windless air that was blinding clear and cast bluish shadows. And above it arched the spotless pale blue sky, where myriads of bright tides of glittering crystals seemed to dance. Herr Clodigonn's wife felt tolerably well these days, free of fever, with scarce any cough, and able to eat without too great distaste. Many days she sat taking her cure for hours on end in the sunny cold on the terrace. She sat in the snow, bundled in wraps and furs, and hopefully breathed in the pure, icy air to do her trachea good. Sometimes she saw Herr Spinell, dressed like herself, and in fur boots that made his feet a fantastic size, taking an airing in the garden. He walked with tentative tread through the snow, holding his arms in a certain careful pose that was stiff yet not without grace. Coming up to the terrace, he would bow very respectfully and mount the first step or so to exchange a few words with her. Today, on my morning walk, I saw a beautiful woman. Good Lord, how beautiful she was, he said, laid his head on one side and spread out his hands. Really, Herr Spinell, do describe her to me. That I cannot do. Or rather, it would not be a fair picture. I only saw the lady. As I glanced at her in passing, I did not actually see her at all. But that fleeting glimpse was enough to rouse my fancy and make me carry away a picture so beautiful that, good Lord, how beautiful it is, she laughed. Is that the way you always look at beautiful women, Herr Spinell? Just a fleeting glance? Yes, madame. It is a better way than if I were avid of actuality, stared them plump in the face, and carried away with me only a consciousness of the blemishes they in fact possess. Avid of actuality. What a strange phrase, a regular literary phrase, Herr Spinell. No one but an author could have said that. It impresses me very much, I must say. There is a lot in it that I dimly understand. There is something free about it, and independent, that even seems to be looking down on reality, though it is so very respectable, is respectability itself, as you might say. And it makes me comprehend, too, that there is something else besides the tangible, something more subtle. I know only one face, he said suddenly with a strange lift in his voice, carrying his closed hands to his shoulders as he spoke and showing his carious teeth in an almost hysterical smile. I know only one face of such lofty nobility that the mere thought of enhancing it through my imagination would be blasphemous, at which I could wish to look, on which I could wish to dwell, not minutes and not hours, but my whole life long, losing myself utterly therein, forgotten to every— Yes, indeed, Herr Spinell. And yet don't you find Fraulein von Osterlo has rather prominent ears? He replied only by a profound bow. Then, standing erect, let his eyes rest with a look of embarrassment and pain on the strange little vein that branched pale blue and sickly across her pure, translucent brow. An odd sort, a very odd sort. Herr Klotterjohn's wife thought about him sometimes, for she had much leisure for thought. Whether it was that the change of air began to lose its effect, or some positively detrimental influence was at work, she began to go backward. The condition of her trachea left much to be desired. She had fever not infrequently, felt tired and exhausted, and could not eat. Dr. Leander most emphatically recommended rest, quiet, caution, care. So she sat, when indeed she was not forced to lie, quite motionless, in the society of Frau Spatz, holding some sort of sewing which she did not sew, and following one or another train of thought. Yes, he gave her food for thought, this very odd Herr Spinell, and the strange thing was, she thought not so much about him as about herself, for he had managed to rouse in her a quite novel interest in her own personality. One day he had said in the course of conversation, "No, they are positively the most enigmatic facts in nature women, I mean." That is a truism, and yet one never ceases to marvel at it afresh. Take some wonderful creature, a sylph, an airy wraith, a fairy dream of a thing, and what does she do? Goes and gives herself to a brawny Hercules at a country fair, or maybe to a butcher's apprentice. Walks about on his arm, even leans her head on his shoulder and looks round with an impish smile as if to say, "Look on this if you like, and break your heads over it." And we break them. With this speech, Herr Klotterjohn's wife had occupied her leisure again and again. Another day, to the wonderment of Frau Spatz, the following conversation took place. "May I ask, madame, though you may very likely think me prying, what your name really is?" "Why, Herr Spinell, you know my name is Klotterjohn." Yes, I know that. Or, rather, I deny it. I mean your own name, your maiden name, of course. You will, in justice, madam, admit that anybody who calls you Klotterjohn ought to be thrashed." She laughed so hard that the little blue veins stood out alarmingly on her brow and gave the pale, sweet face a strained expression most disquieting to see. "Oh, no, not at all, Herr Spinell. Thrashed, indeed. Is the name Klotterjohn so horrible to you?" "Yes, madame. I hate the name from the bottom of my heart. I hated it the first time I heard it. It is the abandonment of ugliness. It is grotesque to make you comply with the custom so far as to fasten your husband's name upon you. It is barbarous and vile." "Well, and how about Eckhoff? Is that any better? Eckhoff is my father's name." "Ah, you see, Eckhoff is quite another thing. There was a great actor named Eckhoff. Eckhoff will do nicely." "You spoke of your father. Then is your mother?" "Yes, my mother died when I was little." "Ah, tell me a little more of yourself, pray." "But not if it tires you. When it tires you, stop, and I will go on talking about Paris, as I did the other day. But you could speak very softly, or even whisper. That would be more beautiful still. You were born in Bremen?" He breathed, rather than uttered, the question with an expression so odd, so heavy with import, as to suggest that Bremen was a city like no other on earth, full of hidden beauties and nameless adventures, and ennobling in some mysterious way those born within its walls. "Yes, imagine," said she involuntarily. "I was born in Bremen. I was there once," he thoughtfully remarked. "Goodness me, you have been there too. Why, Herr Spinell, it seems to me you must have been everywhere there is between Spitzbergen and Tunis." "Yes, I was there once," he repeated. "A few hours one evening. I recall a narrow old street with a strange, warped-looking moon above the gabled roofs. Then I was in a cellar that smelled of wine and mold. It is a poignant memory. Really? Where could that have been, I wonder? Yes, in just such a gray old gabled house I was born, one of the old merchant houses, with echoing wooden floor and white-painted gallery. Then your father is a businessman?" he asked hesitatingly. "Yes, but he is also, and in the first place, an artist." "Ah, in what way?" "He plays the violin." "But just saying that does not mean much." "It is how he plays, Herr Spinell. It is that matters. Sometimes I cannot listen to some of the notes without the tears coming into my eyes and making them burn. Nothing else in the world makes me feel like that. You won't believe it. But I do. Oh, very much I believe it. Tell me, madame, your family is old, is it not? Your family has been living for generations in the old gabled house living, and working and closing their eyes on time. Yes. Tell me why you ask. Because it not infrequently happens that a race with sober, practical bourgeois traditions will, towards the end of its days, flare up in some form of art. Is that a fact? Yes. It is true. My father is surely more of an artist than some that call themselves so and get the glory of it. I only play the piano a little. They have forbidden me now, but at home, in the old days, I still played. Father and I played together. Yes, I have precious memories of all those years, and especially of the garden, our garden, back of the house. It was dreadfully wild and overgrown, and shut in by crumbling mossy walls. But it was just that gave it such charm. In the middle was a fountain with a wide border of sword lilies. In the summer, I spent long hours there with my friends. We all sat round the fountain on little camp stools. "How beautiful," said Herr Spinell, and flung up his shoulders. "You sat there and sang?" "No, we mostly crocheted. But still, yes, we crocheted and chattered, my 6 friends and I." "How beautiful! Good Lord, think of it, how beautiful!" cried Herr Spinell again, his face quite distorted with emotion. "Now what is it you find so particularly beautiful about that, Herr Spinell?" "Oh, there being 6 of them besides you, and your being not one of the 6, but a queen among them. Set apart from your 6 friends. A little gold crown showed in your hair, quite a modest, unostentatious little crown. Still, it was there. Nonsense, there was nothing of the sort. Yes, there was, it shone unseen. But if I had been there, standing among the shrubbery, one of those times, I should have seen it. God knows what you would have seen. But you were not there. Instead of that, it was my husband who came out of the shrubbery one day, with my father. I was afraid they had been listening to our prattle. So it was there then, madam, that you first met your husband? Yes, there it was I saw him first, she said, in quite a glad, strong voice. She smiled, and as she did so, the little blue vein came out and gave her face a constrained and anxious expression. He was calling on my father on business, you see. Next day he came to dinner, and 3 days later he proposed for my hand. Really. It all happened as fast as that. Yes. Or, rather, it went a little slower after that. For my father was not very much inclined to it, you see, and consented on condition that we wait a long time first. He would rather I had stopped with him, and he had doubts in other ways too. But I had set my heart on it, she said, smiling, and once more the little vein dominated her whole face with its look of constraint and anxiety. "Ah, so you set your heart on it. Yes, and I displayed great strength of purpose, as you see, as I see. Yes, so that my father had to give way in the end. And so you forsook him and his fiddle, and the old house with the overgrown garden, and the fountain and your 6 friends, and cave unto Herr Clatterjohn." "And cave unto. You have such a strange way of saying things, Herr Spinell." "Positively biblical." "Yes, I forsook all that. Nature has arranged things that way." "Yes, I suppose that is it." "And it was a question of my happiness." "Of course." "And happiness came to you?" "It came, Herr Spinell, in the moment when they brought little Anton to me, our little Anton, and he screamed so lustily with his strong little lungs. He is very, very strong and healthy, you know." "This is not the first time, madame, that I have heard you speak of your little Anton's good health and great strength. He must be quite uncommonly healthy?" "That he is." "And looks so absurdly like my husband." "Ah, so that was the way of it. And now you are no longer called by the name of Eckhoff, but a different one, and you have your healthy little Anton, and are troubled with your trachea." "Yes." "And you are a perfectly enigmatic man, Herr Spinell, I do assure you." "Yes." "God knows you certainly are," said Frau Spatz, who was present on this occasion. And that conversation, too, gave Herr Kloterjohn's wife food for reflection. Idle as it was, it contained much to nourish those secret thoughts of hers about herself. Was this the baleful influence which was at work? Her weakness increased, and fever often supervened, a quiet glow in which she rested with a feeling of mild elevation, to which she yielded in a pensive mood that was a little affected, self-satisfied, even rather self-righteous. When she had not to keep her bed, Herr Spinell would approach her with immense caution. Tiptoeing on his great feet, he would pause 2 paces off, with his body inclined and one leg behind him, and speak in a voice that was hushed with awe, as though he would lift her higher and higher on the tide of his devotion, until she rested on billowy cushions of cloud where no shrill sound, nor any earthly touch might reach her. And when he did this, she would think of the way Herr Kloterjohn said, "Take care, my angel, keep your mouth closed, Gabrielle," a way that made her feel as though he had struck her roughly though well-meaningly on the shoulder. Then as fast as she could, she would put the memory away and rest in her weakness and elevation of spirit upon the clouds which Herr Spinell spread out for her. One day she abruptly returned to the talk they had had about her early life. "Is it really true, Herr Spinell," she asked, "that you would have seen the little gold crown?" 2 weeks had passed since that conversation, yet he knew at once what she meant, and his voice shook as he assured her that he would have seen the little crown, as she sat among her friends by the fountain, would have caught its fugitive gleam among her locks. A few days later, one of the guests chanced to make a polite inquiry after the health of little Anton. Herr Kloterjohn's wife gave a quick glance at Herr Spinell, who was standing near, and answered in a perfunctory voice, "Thanks, how should he be? He and my husband are quite well, of course." There came a day, at the end of February, colder, purer, more brilliant than any that had come before it, and high spirits held sway at Einfried. The heart cases, consulted in groups, flushed of cheek, the diabetic general caroled like a boy out of school, and the gentleman of the rebellious legs cast aside all restraint. And the reason for all these things was that a sleighing party was in prospect, an excursion in sledges into the mountains, with cracking whips and sleigh bells jingling. Dr. Leander had arranged this diversion for his patients. The serious cases, of course, had to stop at home. Poor things. The other guests arranged to keep it from them. It did them good to practice this much sympathy and consideration. But a few of those remained at home who might very well have gone. Fraulein von Osterloh was of course excused. She had too much on her mind to permit her even to think of going. She was needed at home, and at home she remained. But the disappointment was general when Herr Kloterjohn's wife announced her intention of stopping away. Dr. Leander exhorted her to come and get the benefit of the fresh air, but in vain. She said she was not up to it, she had a headache, she felt too weak, they had to resign themselves. The cynical gentleman took occasion to say, "You will see, the dissipated baby will stop at home too." And he proved to be right, for Herr Spinwan gave out that he intended to work that afternoon. He was prone thus to characterize his dubious activities. Anyhow, not a soul regretted his absence, nor did they take more to heart the news that Frau Magistrate Spatz had decided to keep her young friend company at home. Slang made her feel seasick. Luncheon on the great day was eaten as early as 12 o'clock, and immediately thereafter the sledges drew up in front of Emfried. The guests came through the garden in little groups, warmly wrapped, excited, full of eager anticipation. Herr Kloterjohn's wife stood with Frau Spatz at the glass door which gave on the terrace, while Herr Spinell watched the setting forth from above at the window of his room. They saw the little struggles that took place for the best seats amid joking and laughter, and Fraulein von Osterloh with a fur boa around her neck, running from one sleigh to the other and shoving baskets of provisions under the seats. They saw Dr. Leander with his fur cap pulled low on his brow, marshalling the whole scene with his spectacle lenses glittering to make sure everything was ready. At last he took his own seat and gave the signal to drive off. The horses started up, a few of the ladies shrieked and collapsed, the bells jingled, the short-shafted whips cracked and their long lashes trailed across the snow. Fraulein von Osterloh stood at the gate waving her handkerchief until the train rounded a curve and disappeared. Slowly the merry tinkling died away. Then she turned and hastened back through the garden in pursuit of her duties. The two ladies left the glass door, and almost at the same time Herr Spinell abandoned his post of observation above. Quiet reigned at Einfried. The party would not return before evening. The serious cases lay in their rooms and suffered. Herr Clotilschan's wife took a short turn with her friend. Then they went to their respective chambers. Herr Spinell kept to his, occupied in his own way. Towards 4 o'clock the ladies were served with half a liter of milk apiece, and Herr Spinell with a light tea. Soon after, Herr Clotilschan's wife tapped on the wall between her room and Frau Spatz's and called, "Shan't we go down to the salon, Frau Spatz? I have nothing to do up here." "In just a minute, my dear," answered she. "I'll just put on my shoes, if you will wait a minute. I have been lying down." The salon, naturally, was empty. The ladies took seats by the fireplace. The Frau Magistrate embroidered flowers on a strip of canvas. Herr Clotilschan's wife took a few stitches too, but soon let her work fall in her lap and, leaning on the arm of her chair, fell to dreaming. At length she made some remark, hardly worth the trouble of opening her lips for. The Frau Magistrate asked what she said, and she had to make the effort of saying it all over again, which quite wore her out. But just then steps were heard outside, the door opened, and Herr Spinell came in. "Shall I be disturbing you?" he asked mildly from the threshold, addressing Herr Clotilschan's wife and her alone, bending over her, as it were, from a distance, in the tender, hovering way he had. The young wife answered, "Why should you? The room is free to everybody, and besides, why would it be disturbing us? On the contrary, I am convinced that I am boring Frau Spatz." He had no ready answer, merely smiled and showed his carious teeth, then went hesitatingly up to the glass door, the ladies watching him, and stood with his back to them looking out. Presently he half turned round, still gazing into the garden, and said, "The sun has gone in. The sky clouded over without our seeing it. The dark is coming on already." "Yes, it is all overcast," replied Herr Clotilschan's wife. "It looks as though our sleighing party would have some snow after all. Yesterday at this hour it was still broad daylight, now it is already getting dark." "Well," he said, "after all these brilliant weeks, a little dullness is good for the eyes. The sun shines with the same penetrating clearness upon the lovely and the commonplace, and I, for one, am positively grateful to it for finally going under a cloud. Don't you like the sun, Herr Spinell? Well, I am no painter. When there is no sun, one becomes more profound. It is a thick layer of grayish-white cloud. Perhaps it means thawing weather for tomorrow. But, madame, let me advise you not to sit there at the back of the room looking at your embroidery. Don't be alarmed. I am not looking at it. But what else is there to do?" He had sat down on the piano stool, resting one arm on the lid of the instrument. "Music," he said. "If we could only have a little music here. The English children sing darky songs, and that is all. And yesterday afternoon Fräulein von Osterlo rendered Cloister Bells at top speed," remarked Herr Clotilschan's wife. "But you play, madame," said he in an imploring tone. He stood up. "Once you used to play every day with your father." "Yes, Herr Spinell, in those days I did. In the time of the fountain, you know. Play to us today," he begged. "Just a few notes, this once. If you knew how I long for some music. But our family physician, as well as Dr. Leander, expressly forbade it, Herr Spinell. But they aren't here, either of them. We are free agents. Just a few bars. No, Herr Spinell, it would be no use. Goodness knows what marvels you expect of me, and I have forgotten everything I knew. Truly, I know scarcely anything by heart. Well then, play that scarcely anything. But there are notes here too, on top of the piano. No, that is nothing. But here is some Chopin. Chopin? Yes, the nocturnes. All we have to do is to light the candles. Pray, don't ask me to play, Herr Spinell. I must not. Suppose it were to be bad for me." He was silent, standing there in the light of the two candles, with his great feet, in his long, black tailcoat, with his beardless face and graying hair. His hands hung down at his sides. "Then, madame, I will ask no more." he said at length in a low voice. "If you are afraid it will do you harm, then we shall leave the beauty dead and dumb that might have come alive beneath your fingers. You were not always so sensible, at least not when it was the opposite question from what it is today, and you had to decide to take leave of beauty. Then you did not care about your bodily welfare. You showed a firm and unhesitating resolution when you left the fountain and laid aside the little gold crown. Listen," he said, after a pause, and his voice dropped still lower. "If you sit down and play as you used to play when your father stood behind you and brought tears to your eyes with the tones of his violin, who knows but the little gold crown might glimmer once more in your hair?" "Really," said she with a smile. Her voice happened to break on the word. It sounded husky and barely audible. She cleared her throat and went on. "Are those really Chopin's nocturnes you have there?" "Yes, here they are, open at the place. Everything is ready." "Well, then, in God's name I will play one," said she. "But only one, do you hear? In any case, one will do you, I am sure." With which she got up, laid aside her work, and went to the piano. She seated herself on the music stool, on a few bound volumes, arranged the lights, and turned over the notes. Herr Spinell had drawn up a chair and sat beside her, like a music master. She played the nocturne in E Fiat major, Opus 9, No. 2. If her playing had really lost very much, then she must originally have been a consummate artist. The piano was mediocre, but after the first few notes, she learned to control it. She displayed a nervous feeling for modulations of timbre and a joy in mobility of rhythm that amounted to the fantastic. Her attack was at once firm and soft. Under her hands the very last drop-off sweetness was wrung from the melody. The embellishment seemed to cling with slow grace about her limbs. She wore the same frock as on the day of her arrival, the dark, heavy bodice with the velvet arabesques in high relief that gave her head and hands such an unearthly fragile look. Her face did not change as she played, but her lips seemed to become more clear-cut, the shadows deepened at the corners of her eyes. When she finished, she laid her hands in her lap and went on looking at the notes. Herr Spinell sat motionless. She played another nocturne, and then a third. Then she stood up, but only to look on the top of the piano for more music. It occurred to Herr Spinell to look at the black-bound volumes on the piano stool. All at once he uttered an incoherent exclamation, his large white hands clutching at one of the books. "Impossible! No, it cannot be," he said. "But yes, it is. Guess what this is? What was lying here? Guess what I have in my hands?" "What?" she asked. Mutely he showed her the title page. He was quite pale. He let the book sink and looked at her, his lips trembling. "Really? How did that get here? Give it me," was all she said, set the notes on the piano, and after a moment silence began to play. He sat beside her, bent forward, his hands between his knees, his head bowed. She played the beginning with exaggerated and tormenting slowness, with painfully long pauses between the single figures. The Sehnsuchts motif, roving lost and forlorn like a voice in the night, lifted its trembling question. Then silence, awaiting. And lo, an answer, the same timorous, lonely note, only clearer, only tenderer. Silence again. And then, with that marvelous muted sforzando, like mounting passion, the love motif came in, reared and soared and yearned ecstatically upward to its consummation, sank back, was resolved. The cellos taking up the melody to carry it on with their deep, heavy notes of rapture and despair. Not unsuccessfully did the player seek to suggest the orchestral effects upon the poor instrument at her command. The violin runs of the great climax rang out with brilliant precision. She played with a fastidious reverence, lingering on each figure, bringing out each detail, with the self-forgotten concentration of the priest who lifts the host above his head. Here two forces, two beings, strove towards each other in transports of joy and pain. Here they embraced and became one in delirious yearning after eternity and the absolute. The prelude flamed up and died away. She stopped at the point where the curtains part and sat speechless, staring at the keys. But the boredom of Frau Spatz had now reached that pitch where it distorts the countenance of man, makes the eyes protrude from the head, and lends the features a corpse-like and terrifying aspect. More than that, this music acted on the nerves that controlled her digestion, producing in her dyspeptic organism such malaise that she was really afraid she would have an attack. "I shall have to go up to my room," she said weakly. "Goodbye, I will come back soon." She went out. Twilight was far advanced. Outside, the snow fell thick and soundlessly upon the terrace. The two tapers cast a flickering, circumscribed light. "The second act," he whispered, and she turned the pages and began. What was it dying away in the distance? The ring of a horn, the rustle of leaves. The rippling of a brook? Silence and night crept up over grove and house. The power of longing had full sway. No prayers or warnings could avail against it. The holy mystery was consummated. The light was quenched. With a strange clouding of the timber, the death motif sank down. White-veiled desire, by passion driven, fluttered towards love as through the dark it groped to meet her. Ah, boundless, unquenchable exaltation of union in the eternal beyond, freed from torturing error, escaped from fettering space and time, the thou and the I, the thine and the mine at one forever in a sublimity of bliss. The day might part them with deluding show, but when night fell, then by the power of the potion they would see clear. To him who has looked upon the night of death and known its secret sweets, to him day never can be aught but vain, nor can he know a longing save for night, eternal, real, in which he is made one with love. O night of love, sink downwards and enfold them, grant them the oblivion they crave, release them from this world of partings and betrayals. Lo, the last light is quenched. Fancy and thought alike are lost, merged in the mystic shade that spread its wings of healing above their madness and despair. Now, when deceitful daylight pales, when my raptured eye grows dim, then all that from which the light of day would shut my sight, seeking to blind me with false show, to the staunchless torments of my longing soul, then, then, zero wonder of fulfillment, even then I am the world. Followed Brangana's dark notes of warning, and then those soaring violins so higher than all reason. I cannot understand it all, Herr Spinell. Much of it I only divine. What does it mean, this, even then I am the world? He explained in a few low-toned words. Yes, yes, it means that. How is it you can understand it all so well, yet cannot play it? Strangely enough, he was not proof against this simple question. He colored, twisted his hands together, shrank into his chair. The two things seldom happen together, he wrung from his lips at last. No, I cannot play. But go on. And on they went, into the intoxicated music of the love mystery. Did love ever die? Tristan's love. The love of thy Isolde and of mine. Ah, no, death cannot touch that which can never die. And what of him could die, save what distracts and tortures love and severs united lovers? Love joined the two in sweet conjunction. Death was powerless to sever such a bond, save only when death was given to one with the very life of the other. Their voices rose in mystic unison, wrapped in the wordless hope of that death in love, of endless oneness in the wonder kingdom of the night. Sweet night, eternal night of love, an all-encompassing land of rapture, once envisaged or divined, what eye could bear to open again on desolate dawn? Forfend such fears, most gentle death. Release these lovers quite from need of waking. O tumultuous storm of rhythms! O glad chromatic upward surge of metaphysical perception! How find, how bind this bliss so far remote from parting's torturing pangs? Ah, gentle glow of longing soothing and kind! Ah, yielding sweet sublime! Ah, raptured sinking into the twilight of eternity. Thou Isolde Tristan the first, yet no more Tristan, no more Isolde. All at once, something startling happened. The musician broke off and peered into the darkness with her hand above her eyes. Herr Spinell turned round quickly in his chair. The corridor door had opened. A sinister form appeared, leant on the arm of a second form. It was a guest of Einfried, one of those who, like themselves, had been in no state to undertake the sleigh ride, but had passed this twilight hour in one of her pathetic, instinctive rounds of the house. It was that patient who had borne 14 children and was no longer capable of a single thought. It was Frau Pastor Hohenrauch on the arm of her nurse. She did not look up. With groping step, she paced the dim background of the room and vanished by the opposite door, rigid and still, like a lost and wandering soul. Stillness reigned once more. That was Frau Pastor Hohenrauch, he said. Yes, that was poor Frau Hohenrauch, she answered. Then she turned over some leaves and played the finale, played Isolde's song of love and death. How colorless and clear were her lips. How deep the shadows lay beneath her eyes. The little pale blue vein in her transparent brow showed fearfully plain and prominent. Beneath her flying fingers, the music mounted to its unbelievable climax and was resolved in that ruthless, sudden pianissimo which is like having the ground glide from beneath one's feet, yet like a sinking too into the very deeps of desire. Followed the immeasurable plenitude of that vast redemption and fulfillment. It was repeated, swelled into a deafening, unquenchable tumult of immense appeasement that wove and welled and seemed about to die away, only to swell again and weave the Sehnsuchtsmotiv into its harmony, at length to breathe an outward breath and die, faint on the air and soar away. Profound stillness. They both listened, their heads on one side. "Those are bells," she said. "It is the sleighs," he said. "I will go now." He rose and walked across the room. At the door he halted, then turned and shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. And then, some 15 or 20 paces from her, it came to pass that he fell upon his knees, both knees, without a sound. His long black coat spread out on the floor. He held his hands clasped over his mouth, and his shoulders heaved. She sat there with hands in her lap, leaning forward, turned away from the piano, and looked at him. Her face wore a distressed, uncertain smile, while her eyes searched the dimness at the back of the room, searched so painfully, so dreamily, she seemed hardly able to focus her gaze. The jingling of sleigh bells came nearer and nearer. There was the crack of whips, a babble of voices. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The sleighing party had taken place on the 26th of February and was talked of for long afterwards. The next day, February 27th, a day of thaw that set everything to melting and dripping, splashing and running, Herr Klutterjohn's wife was in capital health and spirits. On the 28th, she brought up a little blood, not much, still it was blood, and accompanied by a far greater loss of strength than ever before. She went to bed. Dr. Leander examined her, stony-faced. He prescribed, according to the dictates of science morphia, little pieces of ice, absolute quiet. Next day, on account of pressure of work, he turned her case over to Dr. Muffler, who took it on in humility and meekness of spirit, and, according to the letter of his contract, a quiet, pallid, insignificant little man, whose unadvertised activities were consecrated to the care of the slight cases and the hopeless ones. Dr. Müller presently expressed the view that the separation between Frau Klutterjohn and her spouse had lasted over long. It would be well if Herr Klutterjohn, in case his flourishing business permitted, were to make another visit to Einfried. One might write him, or even wire. And surely it would benefit the young mother's health and spirits if he were to bring young Anton with him, quite aside from the pleasure it would give the physicians to behold with their own eyes this so healthy little Anton. And Herr Klutterjohn came. He got Herr Müller's little wire and arrived from the Baltic coast. He got out of the carriage, ordered coffee and rolls, and looked considerably aggrieved. "My dear sir," he asked. "What is the matter? Why have I been summoned?" "Because it is desirable that you should be near your wife," Dr. Muller replied. "Desirable! Desirable! But is it necessary?" "It is a question of expense with me. Times are poor and railway journeys cost money. Was it imperative I should take this whole day's journey? If it were the lungs that are attacked, I should say nothing. But as it is only the trachea, thank God." "Herr Klotterjan," said Dr. Muffler mildly, "in the first place, the trachea is an important organ." He ought not to have said "in the first place," because he did not go on to the second. But there also arrived at Einfried, in Herr Klotterjan's company, a full-figured personage, arrayed all in red and gold and plaid, and she it was who carried on her arm Anton Klotterjan, Jr., that healthy little Anton. Yes, there he was, and nobody could deny that he was healthy even to excess. Pink and white and plump and fragrant, in fresh and immaculate attire, he rested heavily upon the bare red arm of his bebraided body-servant, consumed huge quantities of milk and chopped beef, shouted and screamed, and in every surrendered himself to his instincts. Our author from the window of his chamber had seen him arrive. With a peculiar gaze, both veiled and piercing, he fixed young Anton with his eye as he was carried from the carriage into the house. He stood there a long time with the same expression on his face. Herr Spinell was sitting in his room at work. His room was like all the others at Einfried old-fashioned, simple and distinguished. The massive chest of drawers was mounted with brass lions, heads. The tall mirror on the wall was not a single surface, but made up of many little panes set in lead. There was no carpet on the polished blue-paved floor. The stiff legs of the furniture prolonged themselves on it in clear-cut shadows. A spacious writing table stood at the window, across whose panes the author had drawn the folds of a yellow curtain, in all probability that he might feel more retired. In the yellow twilight he bent over the table and wrote one of those numerous letters which he sent weekly to the post, and to which, quaintly enough, he seldom or never received an answer. A large, thick quire of paper lay before him, whose upper left-hand corner was a curious involved drawing of a landscape, and the name Detlev Spinell in the very latest thing in lettering. He was covering the page with a small, painfully neat, and punctiliously traced script. "Sir," he wrote, "I address the following lines to you because I cannot help it, because what I have to say so fills and shakes and tortures me, the words come in such a rush that I should choke if I did not take this means to relieve myself." If the truth were told, this about the rush of words was quite simply wide of the fact. And God knows what sort of vanity it was made Herr Spinell put it down. For his words did not come in a rush, they came with such pathetic slowness. Considering the man was a writer by trade, you would have drawn the conclusion, watching him, that a writer is one to whom writing comes harder than to anybody else. He held between two fingertips one of those curious downy hairs he had on his cheek, and twirled it round and round, whole quarter hours at a time, gazing into space and not coming forwards by a single line, then wrote a few words, daintily, and struck again. Yet so much was true, that what had managed to get written sounded fluent and vigorous, though the matter was odd enough, even almost equivocal, and at times impossible to follow. "I feel," the letter went on, "an imperative necessity to make you see what I see, to show you through my eyes, illuminated by the same power of language that closed them for me, all the things which have stood before my inner eye for weeks, like an indelible vision. It is my habit to yield to the impulse which urges me to put my own experiences into flamingly right and unforgettable words and to give them to the world. And therefore hear me. I will do no more than relate what has been and what is. I will merely tell a story, a brief, unspeakably touching story, without comment, blame, or passing of judgment, simply in my own words. It is the story of Gabrielle Eckhoff, of the woman whom you, sir, call your wife. And mark you this, it is your story, it happened to you, yet it will be I who will, for the first time, lift it for you to the level of an experience. Do you remember the garden, the old, overgrown garden behind the gray patrician house? The moss was green in the crannies of its weather-beaten wall, and behind the wall dreams and neglect held sway. Do you remember the fountain in the center? The pale mauve lilies leaned over its crumbling rim. The little stream prattled softly as it fell upon the riven paving. The summer day was drawing to its close. 7 maidens sat circle-wise round the fountain, but the 7th, or rather the first and only one, was not like the others, for the sinking sun seemed to be weaving a queenly coronal among her locks. Her eyes were like troubled dreams, and yet her pure lips wore a smile. They were singing. They lifted their little faces to the leaping streamlet and watched its charming curve droop earthward. Their music hovered round it as it leaped and danced. Perhaps their slim hands were folded in their laps the while they sang. Can you, sir, recall the scene, or did you ever see it? No, you saw it not. Your eyes were not formed to see it, nor your ears to catch the chaste music of their song. You saw it not, or else you would have forbade your lungs to breathe, your heart to beat. You must have turned aside and gone back to your own life, taking with you what you had seen to preserve it, in the depth of your soul to the end of your earthly life, a sacred and inviolable relic. But what did you do? That scene, sir, was an end and culmination. Why did you come to spoil it, to give it a sequel, to turn it into the channels of ugly and commonplace life? It was a peaceful apotheosis and a moving, bathed in a sunset beauty of decadence, decay, and death. An ancient stock, too exhausted and refined for life and action, stood there at the end of its days. Its latest manifestations were those of art, violin notes, full of that melancholy understanding which is ripeness for death. Did you look into her eyes? Those eyes where tears so often stood, lured by the dying sweetness of the violin. Her 6 friends may have had souls that belonged to life, but hers, the queen's and sisters, death and beauty had claimed for their own. You saw it, that deathly beauty, saw and coveted. The sight of that touching purity moved you with no awe or trepidation. And it was not enough for you to see, you must possess, you must use, you must desecrate. It was the refinement of a choice you made. You are a gourmand, sir, a plebeian gourmand, a peasant with taste. Once more let me say that I have no wish to offend you. What I have just said is not an affront, it is a statement, a simple psychological statement of your simple personality, a personality which, for literary purposes, is entirely uninteresting. I make the statement solely because I feel an impulse to clarify for you your own thoughts and actions, because it is my inevitable task on this earth to call things by their right names, to make them speak, to illuminate the unconscious. The world is full of what I call the unconscious type, and I cannot endure it. I cannot endure all these unconscious types. I cannot bear all this dull, uncomprehending, unperceiving, living and behaving, this world of maddening naivete about me. It tortures me until I am driven irresistibly to set it all in relief, in the round, to explain, express, and make self-conscious everything in the world, so far as my powers will reach, quite unhampered by the result, whether it be for good or evil, whether it brings consolation and healing, or piles grief on grief. You, sir, as I said, are a plebeian gourmand, a peasant with taste. You stand upon an extremely low evolutionary level. Your own constitution is coarse-fibered. But wealth and a sedentary habit of life have brought about in you a corruption of the nervous system as sudden as it is unhistoric, and this corruption has been accompanied by a lascivious refinement in your choice of gratifications. It is altogether possible that the muscles of your gullet began to contract, as at the sight of some particularly rare dish, when you conceived the idea of making Gabrielle Eckhoff your own. In short, you lead her idle will astray, you beguile her out of that moss-grown garden into the ugliness of life, you give her your own vulgar name and make of her a married woman, a housewife, a mother. You take that deathly beauty spent aloof, flowering and lofty unconcern of the uses of this world and debase it to the service of common things, You sacrifice it to that stupid, contemptible, clumsy, graven image we call nature, and not the faintest suspicion of the vileness of your conduct visits your peasant soul. Again, what is the result? This being, whose eyes are like troubled dreams, she bears you a child, and so doing she endows the new life, a gross continuation of its author's own, with all the blood, all the physical energy she possesses, and she dies. She dies, sir, and if she does not go hence with your vulgarity upon her head, if at the very last she has lifted herself out of the depths of degradation, and passes in an ecstasy, with the deathly kiss of beauty on her brow, well, it is I, sir, who have seen to that. You, meanwhile, were probably spending your time with chambermaids in dark corners. But your son, Gabriele Eckhoff's son, is alive. He is living and flourishing. Perhaps he will continue in the way of his father, become a well-fed, trading, tax-paying citizen, a capable Philistine pillar of society. In any case, a tone-deaf, normally functioning individual, responsible, sturdy and stupid, troubled by not a doubt. Kindly permit me to tell you, sir, that I hate you. I hate you and your child, as I hate the life of which you are the representative. Cheap, ridiculous, but yet triumphant life, the everlasting antipodes and deadly enemy of beauty. I cannot say I despise you, for I am honest. You are stronger than I. I have no armor for the struggle between us. I have only the word, avenging weapon of the weak. Today I have availed myself of this weapon. This letter is nothing but an act of revenge. You see how honorable I am. And if any word of mine is sharp and bright and beautiful enough to strike home, to make you feel the presence of a power you do not know, to shake even a minute your robust equilibrium, I shall rejoice indeed. Detlev Spinell. And Herr Spinell put this screed into an envelope, applied a stamp and a many-flourished address, and committed it to the post. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Herr Cloderian knocked on Herr Spinell's door. He carried a sheet of paper in his hand covered with neat script, and he looked like man bent on energetic action. The post office had done its duty. The letter had taken its appointed way. It had traveled from Einfried to Einfried and reached the hand for which it was meant. It was now 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Herr Cloderian's entry found Herr Spinell sitting on the sofa reading his own novel with the appalling cover design. He rose and gave his caller a surprised and inquiring look, though at the same time he distinctly flushed. "Good afternoon," said Herr Cloderian. "Pardon the interruption, but may I ask if you wrote this?" He held up in his left hand the sheet inscribed with fine, clear characters, and struck it with the back of his right and made it crackle. Then he stuffed that hand into the pocket of his easy-fitting trousers, put his head on one side, and opened his mouth in a way some people have to listen. Herr Spinell, curiously enough, smiled. He smiled engagingly, with a rather confused, apologetic air. He put his hand to his head as though trying to recollect himself, and said, "Ah, yes, quite right, I took the liberty." The fact was, he had given in to his natural man today and slept nearly up to midday, with the result that he was suffering from a bad conscience and a heavy head, was nervous and incapable of putting up a fight. And the spring air made him limp and good for nothing. So much, we must say, in extenuation of the utterly silly figure he cut in the interview which followed. "Ah, indeed, very good," said Herr Cloderian. He dug his chin into his chest, elevated his brows, stretched his arms, and indulged in various other antics by way of getting down to business after his introductory question. But unfortunately he so much enjoyed the figure he cut that he rather overshot the mark, and the rest of the scene hardly lived up to this preliminary pantomime. However, Herr Spinell went rather pale. "Very good," repeated Herr Cloderian. "Then permit me to give you an answer in person. It strikes me as idiotic to write pages of letter to a person when you can speak to him any hour of the day." "Well, idiotic," Herr Spinell said with his apologetic smile. He sounded almost meek. "Idiotic," repeated Herr Cloderian, nodding violently in token of the soundness of his position. "And I should not demean myself to answer this scrawl. To tell the truth, I should have thrown it away at once if I had not found in it the explanation of certain changes. However, that is no affair of yours, and has nothing to do with the thing anyhow. I am a man of action. I have other things to do than to think about your unspeakable visions. I wrote, "Indelible visions," said Herr Spinell, drawing himself up. This was the only moment at which he displayed a little self-respect. "Indelible, unspeakable," responded Herr Cloterjohn, referring to the text. "You write a villainous hand, sir. You would not get a position in my office, let me tell you. It looks clear enough at first, but when you come to study it, it is full of shakes and quavers. But that is your affair. It's no business of mine. What I have come to say to you is that you are a tomfool, which you probably know already. Furthermore, you are a cowardly sneak. I don't suppose I have to give the evidence for that either. My wife wrote me once that when you meet a woman you don't look her square in the face, but just give her a side squint, so as to carry away a good impression, because you are afraid of the reality. I should probably have heard more of the same sort of stories about you, only unfortunately she stopped mentioning you. But this is the kind of thing you are. You talk so much about beauty, you are all chicken-livered hypocrisy and cant, which is probably at the bottom of your impudent allusion to out-of-the-way corners, too. That ought to crush me, of course, but it just makes me laugh. It doesn't do a thing but make me laugh. Understand? Have I clarified your thoughts and actions for you, you pitiable object, you? Though, of course, it is not my invariable calling. Inevitable was the word I used, Herr Spinell said, but he did not insist on the point. He stood there, crestfallen, like a big, unhappy, chidden, gray-haired schoolboy. Invariable or inevitable, whichever you like. Anyhow, you are a contemptible cur, and that I tell you. You see me every day at table, you bow and smirk and say good morning, and one fine day you send me a scrawl full of idiotic abuse. Yes, you've a lot of courage, on paper, and it's not only this ridiculous letter you have been intriguing behind my back. I can see that now. Though you need not flatter yourself it did any good. If you imagine you put any ideas into my wife's head, you never were more mistaken in your life. And if you think she behaved any different when we came from what she always does, then you just put the cap onto your own foolishness. She did not kiss the little chap, that's true, but it was only a precaution, because they have the idea now that the trouble is with her lungs, and in such cases you can't tell whether, though that still remains to be proved, no matter what you say with your "she dies, sir, you silly ass." Here Herr Cloterjohn paused for breath. He was in a furious passion. He kept stabbing the air with his right forefinger and crumpling the sheet of paper in his other hand. His face, between the blonde English mutton chops, was frightfully red, and his dark brow was rent with swollen veins like lightnings of scorn. "You hate me," he went on, "and you would despise me if I were not stronger than you. Yes, you're right there. I've got my heart in the right place, by God, and you've got yours mostly in the seat of your trousers. I would most certainly hack you into bits if it weren't against the law, you and your gabble about the word, you skulking fool. But I have no intention of putting up with your insults, and when I show this part about the vulgar name to my lawyer at home, you will very likely get a little surprise. My name, sir, is a first-rate name, and I have made it so by my own efforts. You know better than I do whether anybody would ever lend you a penny piece on yours, you lazy lout. The law defends people against the kind you are. You are a common danger. You are enough to drive a body crazy. But you're left this time, my master. I don't let individuals like you get the best of me so fast. I've got my heart in the right place." Herr Cloterjohn's excitement had really reached a pitch. He shrieked, he bellowed, over and over again that his heart was in the right place. They were singing! Exactly! Well, they weren't. They were knitting. And if, heard what they said, it was about a recipe for potato pancakes. And when I show my father-in-law that about the old decayed family, you'll probably have a libel suit on your hands. Did you see the picture? Yes, of course I saw it, only I don't see why that should make me hold my breath and run away. I don't leer at women out of the corner of my eye. I look at them square, and if I like their looks, I go for them. I have my heart in the right place. Somebody knocked. Knocked 8 or 10 times, quite fast, one after the other. A sudden, alarming little commotion that made Herr Clodagnon pause, and an unsteady voice that kept tripping over itself in its haste and distress said, "Herr Clodagnon, Herr Clodagnon, oh, is Herr Clodagnon there?" "Stop outside," said Herr Clodagnon in a growl. "What's the matter? I'm busy talking." "Oh, Herr Clodagnon," said the quaking, breaking voice, "you must come. The doctors are there too. Oh, it is all so dreadfully sad." He took one step to the door and tore it open. Frau Magistrate Spots was standing there. She had her handkerchief before her mouth, and giant egg-shaped tears rolled into it, 2 by 2. "Herr Clodagnon," she got out. "It is so frightfully sad. She has brought up so much blood, such a horrible lot of blood." She was sitting up quite quietly in bed and humming a little snatch of music, and there it came. My God, such a quantity you never saw. "Is she dead?" yelled Herr Clodagnon. As he spoke, he clutched the Ratten by the arm and pulled her to and fro on the sill. "Not quite. Not dead. She can see me, can't she? Brought up a little blood again? From the lung, eh? Yes, I give in. It may be from the lung." "Gabrielle!" he suddenly cried out, and his eyes filled with tears. You could see what a burst of good, warm, honest human feeling came over him. "Yes, I'm coming," he said, and dragged the Ratten after him as he went with long strides down the corridor. You could still hear his voice, from quite a distance, sounding fainter and fainter. "Not quite, eh? From the lung?" Herr Spinell stood still on the spot where he had stood during the whole of Herr Clodagnon's rudely interrupted call, and looked out the open door. At length he took a couple of steps and listened down the corridor. But all was quiet, so he closed the door and came back into the room. He looked at himself a while in the glass. Then he went up to the writing table, took a little flask and a glass out of a drawer, and drank a cognac, for which nobody can blame him. Then he stretched himself out on the sofa and closed his eyes. The upper half of the window was down. Outside in the garden birds were twittering. Those dainty, saucy little notes held all the spring, finely and penetratingly expressed. Herr Spinell spoke once. "Invariable calling," he said, and moved his head and drew in the air through his teeth, as though his nerves pained him violently. Impossible to recover any poise or tranquility. Crude experiences like this were too much. He was not made for them. By a sequence of emotions, the analysis of which would lead us too far afield, Herr Spinell arrived at the decision that it would be well for him to have a little out-of-doors exercise. He took his hat and went downstairs. As he left the house and issued into the mild, fragrant air, he turned his head and lifted his eyes, slowly, scanning the house until he reached one of the windows, a curtained window, on which his gaze rested a while, fixed and somber. Then he laid his hands on his back and moved away across the gravel path. He moved in deep thought. The beds were still straw-covered, the trees and bushes bare, but the snow was gone, the path was only damp in spots. The large garden with its grottos, bowers, and little pavilions lay in the splendid, colorful afternoon light. Strong shadow and rich golden sun, and the dark network of branches stood out sharp and articulate against the bright sky. It was about that hour of the afternoon when the sun takes shape, and from being a formless volume of light, turns to a visibly sinking disk, whose milder, more saturated glow the eye can tolerate. Herr Spinell did not see the sun. The direction the path took hid it from his view. He walked with bent head and hummed a strain of music, a short phrase, a figure that mounted wailingly and complainingly upward, the Sehnsuchts motif. But suddenly, with a start, a quick, jerky intake of breath, he stopped, as though rooted to the path, and gazed straight ahead of him, with brows fiercely gathered, staring eyes, and an expression of horrified repulsion. The path had curved. Just here he was facing the setting sun. It stood large and slantwise in the sky, crossed by 2 narrow strips of gold-rimmed cloud. It set the treetops aglow and poured its red-gold radiance across the garden. And there, erect in the path, in the midst of the glory, with the sun's mighty aureola above her head, there confronted him an exuberant figure, all arrayed in red and gold and plaid. She had one hand on her swelling hip. With the other she moved to and fro the graceful little perambulator. And in this perambulator sat Anton Cloderjean Jr., Gabriel Eckhoff's fat son. There he sat among his cushions, in a woolly white jacket and large white hat, plump-cheeked, well cared for, and magnificent, and his blithe, unerring gaze encountered Herr Spinell's. The novelist pulled himself together. Was he not a man? Had he not the power to pass this unexpected sun-kindled apparition there in the path and continue on his walk? But Anton Cloderjean began to laugh and shout, most horrible to see. He squealed, he crowed with inconceivable delight. It was positively uncanny to hear him. God knows what had taken him. Perhaps the sight of Herr Spinell's long, black figure set him off. Perhaps an attack of sheer animal spirits gave rise to his wild outburst of merriment. He had a bone-teething ring in one hand and a tin rattle in the other, and these two objects he flung aloft with shoutings, shook them to and fro, and clashed them together in the air, as though purposely to frighten Herr Spinell. His eyes were almost shut, his mouth gaped open till all the rosy gums were displayed, and as he shouted he rolled his head about in excess of mirth. Herr Spinell turned round and went thence. Pursued by the youthful Cloderjean's joyous screams, he went away across the gravel, walking stiffly, yet not without grace. His gait was the hesitating gait of one who would disguise the fact that, inwardly, he is running away.